So, and thanks for having me back. I was here last year talking about something completely different as well. So today's talk is about Dune, and it's a little scary to talk about Dune for me because it's its own extended universe. It says published in 1965 by Frank Herbert. That's a younger Frank Herbert, and for the younger people in here, that's a typewriter. So my thesis, I kind of have a double thesis. The first one is that Dune is using elements from both general semantics, which is fairly well known, honestly, as I'll talk about, and media ecology to explore its conceptions of humanity and politics. My slightly deeper thesis that I'm going to get into, hopefully there's time, humanity is becoming its own extensions of man, the McLuhan term, by interiorizing the abilities and consequences of a post-digital media environment. So that's my thesis. There's a lot of things you can talk about with Dune. As I was kind of saying, it's its own extended universe. There's many novels, there's graphic novels, there's multiple adaptations. It's Tolkien-esque in its complexity, maybe even more so. So if you're unfamiliar, I can't do a lot of plot description for time, so I'm sorry, but I'm going to do a lot of backstory that I hope will make up for it. Okay. The general semantics part is relatively easy. Herbert studied general semantics in the 60s and was a ghostwriter for S.I. Hayakawa. That's in the Timothy O'Reilly Frank Herbert monograph. So that's where that's from. That's, of course, Hayakawa. So the general semantics part's pretty easy. The media environment stuff is a little more complicated, and I'm going to spend a little more time on that, I think, because there isn't that much media description in Dune. And that's really started me going. I was going to give a pretty simple presentation, and then I was like, wait a minute, there actually isn't media in here. So how can I talk about media when there's no media? So that's kind of ended up being the genesis of this in a lot of ways. So some backstory, as I said, Dune takes place about 25,000 years from our present. So it is a very long time in the future. And I don't know how well you can see this. This is representing a key story that founded the Dune universe, which is a war between computers / artificial intelligences and humans. This is from the David Lynch, but the Alan Smithy version, since Dune abandoned his putting his name in the extended edition. There's some images of this backstory event, and there's some religious iconography, and there's the machines here. So this is, I guess, what this looked like. How humans were able to do this, I'm not sure, but it's 20,000 years ago, so you have to assume that they were able to do that. So this is kind of the key transitional event. The interesting term that comes out of this, which is very interesting, I think, but I'm not going to really explore, and it's the first rule of the Bible / political structure that comes from this event, is man may not be replaced, which has, I think, a lot of neo-Nazi overtones, which is interesting, but that's for a different paper. So an interesting question is, how can you replace computers? We already are having a hard time living without computers. So how can 7,000 years ago people live without computers, much less 25,000 years in the past, in the future, basically by having humans take on certain functions that computers do now, and along with more so. So drastic increase in human abilities. There's a body-mind control, a ability to use logic, an ability to take away semantic reactions and not respond emotionally from general semantics, from things like yoga as well, and similar practices that try to combine mind and body. There are extensive breeding programs in eugenics that I'll talk about in a second. There's memory enhancements, and then there's abilities to predict, which is maybe one of the more interesting things about Dune that you can talk about in terms of today, in terms of predictive analytics. And then lastly, mind-altering drugs. It was the 60s that increased sensory perception and then increased the body-mind control and prescience. The MacGuffin, maybe I should say, of the Dune universe is the spice, which is called melange. That's found only on the desert planet Arrakis, and that is the main thing that everybody is after. The primary resource, and the obvious connections to the Middle East and oil, I think, in the 1960s were there, but Herbert's doing something slightly different here. So 3 groups in Dune are representing this primarily. There's a lot of groups in Dune. I'm gonna do 3. First are the BENE GESSERIT. They're a religious order, and I have religious in quotes because they don't appear to really have a deity, but they have a messiah that they're going to produce via eugenics. This order is based in body-mind control and, as I said, breeding practices, eugenics. And our hero is Paul. He's going through the Joseph Campbell hero's journey in the novel. His mother's a BENE GESSERIT and trains him in this. And this is BENE GESSERIT mother leader from the David Lynch version of Dune. The Mentats are specifically computer replacements. They have extensive trainings in memory and calculation ability. Maybe more interestingly, they also have, because of the artificial intelligence thing, they can do hypotheses and strategies. He's wearing a military uniform, which I think is interesting. They're taking over that kind of role. And this one is from the Villeneuve 2021 Dune that came out recently. And then lastly, this might be difficult to see, the Navigators. They aren't represented in the 2021 yet. Maybe the sequel. This is one from 1984, the 1984 version. As you can see, they're quite post-human. They can use the melange of the spices predictive abilities to determine the courses for their spaceships. It goes beyond that, but that's how they use it. So, okay. That's basically my intro. I'm not sure I forgot to set my timer, so I'm not trying to look at my toe, but that's my intro. Let's get on with the general semantic stuff. So, very conveniently, there's a 1998 article by Ronnie Parkinson in Etc. about Dune and general semantics. So let me just give you 3 quotes from that. Dune explores the wielding of political, economic, and military power, and by incorporating aspects of general semantics, their common thread, the power of language. 1. A central theme of the novel is not only ecology, but ecology examined in many contexts. Dune explores political, economic, social, and language ecologies as well. And lastly, quoting the Timothy O'Reilly monograph that I started with, Dune emphasizes the importance of language and other cultural givens in providing a fundamental unconscious structure for human thought and behavior. It is possible to train human beings into new semantic habits and first-order experiences. So his main example for this, and this is actually what I was going to do in this paper before it got away from me, is what's called the voice. So the voice, this is quite dark, but it's a 2021 film. It's just what the 2020 films look like. The voice is literally using your voice to dominate the other person briefly in terms of their movements and their actions. So quote from this is, and this is Paul, 2021 Paul, meeting the BENE GESSERIT mother for the first time. She has come to his planet to meet him, and she yells out, sorry, I can read this. Now you come here. The command whipped out at him. Paul found himself obeying before he could think about it. Using the voice on me, he thought. He stopped at her gesture, standing beside her knee. And as you see, Villeneuve was very interested in exact adaptation. So it's literally standing at her knee, which I found funny. As I mentioned, this section on the voice is very commonly found in writing about Dune, not just general semantics writing, but all kinds of articles about Dune. So this is kind of everywhere. I'm taking it as really 3 different things. Interiority. There's an unconscious mind apart from the conscious. It's controllable. And another person can control someone's conscious behaviors using language that is activating their unconscious mind and making them do things briefly. So how does this work? Good question. It's not really explained. Robert Mack, I didn't write this. Robert Mack, writing in 2011, argues it's by meticulous, quote, meticulous adjustment of personal vocal tones to mirror a target's own based on extensive physical and auditory training. And there's other thoughts about unconscious bypassing of conscious control. Quotes from the novel suggest that, and this is what I have here, it's not tone shadings. It's a complete understanding of the listener. a recognition and catalog of behaviors, semantic reactions, the other person's semantic reactions that can be used and focused on another, kind of weaponized general semantics, if I can say that, which I'm not sure if I can, but that's how I read it. So first quote and third person narration. Paul sat back. He had used the questions and hyper awareness to do what his mother called registering the person. He had Keen's now, tune of voice, each detail of face and gesture. That would be enough to control Keen's, which he does not do. And then Jessica, his mom, in voiceover. I have Stilgar's voice and pattern registered now. I could control him with a word. For the Gregory Basin folk, notice the use of the word pattern. That's also big in Dune. That's another direction this paper could have gone. There's an idea that human behavior and technology and history are all in patterns, and someone who is trained in controlling them can actually do that. Not part of my paper, but I thought interesting. However, the voice, whoa, that all plopped out. The voice isn't really sufficient in explaining general semantics, and definitely not explaining the meaning environment. There's just one more case of it early in the novel, but it's not really done. In fact, Jessica actually says at one point, we could control people individually, but we can't control groups, and we need to control groups to do what we want. So to talk about that, I need to talk about the media environment. Nothing in the 1984 Dune. The only thing I can give you is Paul from 2021. It's hard to see. He's reading a book, an actual book. The book is projecting these images, which I guess the book does. And there's also a hint in the novel that there's some kind of mnemonic suggestion in the book that in these books, they're called film books, that register in a person's unconscious mind. So that's almost the entire media representation we get in Dune. So let me talk about this. It's not really much surprise that the Fremen, they're the people in Arrakis, who are the indigenous people in Arrakis. They're depicted as an oral culture. I have some Walter On quotes. Oral culture is redundant, conservative, repetitive, close to lived experience, agonistic in their verbal formats and then their lifestyle. This is the Fremen. The struggle for existence is so difficult on this desert planet that they can't do anything. They can't experiment. They just have to follow myth, tradition, and ritual. Oh, this is apart from the literate culture, which is Paul is from, based in individualism, interiority, that, on quote again, fosters abstractions that disengage knowledge from the arena where human beings struggle with one another. You already got, I think, in an early quote, of Paul and Jessica voiceover, and there's continual interior monologues in the novel and in the first film. The 2021 film does not do that. And his family is almost wiped out because they cannot get into the lived experience. They can't understand what's happening. So an easy argument you could make, and this is where I was halfway through writing this thing, is that Paul is dominating this Fremen oral society by his ability to take advantage, to utilize the myths of the Fremen society. A little bit more backstory. The Bene Gesserit, who I mentioned before, they're the religious order. Paul and Jessica invested in them. They have planted religious stories throughout various planets. They use myth to inculcate control in populations. Basically, what Dune is depicting is a mass domination via control over narrative. The pre-narrative Fremen are absorbing the Bene Gesserit's messianic myths and eventually take Paul as their messiah because Paul is fitting into these myths. So it's there, and there's Paul from 1980, from the I think extended version. No, this is the Lynch version. The extended version cut this because there's a fascist iconography that Lynch uses that it is uncomfortable, I think, for people. So they took it out of later, and we're not sure what Villeneuve is going to do with this. As I said, as implied by this, the media environment is not oral or literate, though. It's post-digital. And Paul actually, just to go to the end of the novel, this is his final form. He can see both the past and then make predictions about the future based on visions. So he's interiorizing what the mentats can do and what the navigators can do and what the BENE GESSERITs can do. He's becoming a Fremen. He already has interiority. He's taking on all of these aspects to become the person that can do these things. So, as I said, Dune isn't really oral alert. It's post-computer. Let me find my place here. The post-human in development Dune depicts the eugenic programs, the mental disciplines, the much future general semantics become a post-human speciesization. So this brings me back to my McLuhan. This is a little bit of a metaphor. The extensions of man interiorizing humanity, newer media, as we also know from McLuhan, containing aspects of earlier media refigured. So these earlier forms that we get from early media become interiorized in humanity along with the new ones. So we have the Fremen culture based in myth. We have the literate era based in Paul and the Atreides family, his family. We have the electronic media, haven't mentioned them. The Harkonnen, they're the bad guys. They're obsessed with sensation and entertainment. And then we have the digital, post-digital people, the three groups I talked about earlier. They control all of these things. They control myth. They control the body. They control subjectivity. And they have this memory and predictive ability. And Paul ends up mastering all of these things. Oral, mythic, literate, interior, electronic, sensation, and digital predictive, becoming a combination of all these groups by interiorizing the consequences of the media forms. Ironically, if you know the novel, this traps him into leading a genocidal war. So this isn't necessarily a positive thing for Herbert, and that's something else you could talk about, but that's not the direction I went. How's my time? My time. Okay, I have clips, but I can't show them, but they're good. Thank you very much.